I've been to dozens of leadership seminars and this and that, and it's always about leadership and the difference between leader and not every manager is a leader and vice versa. But I think that because there's been such an
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on leadership, that there isn't so much emphasis on management. And so when I've stepped into
Mm-hmm.
management roles, I found that I actually don't know how to do this.
Hey, welcome back to the Doctor's Den. Today I have the absolute pleasure of having Hillel Davis with me. Hi, Hillel. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks so much for inviting me on.
It is my absolute pleasure. It's so much fun to catch up with students who graduated, first, second groupings, and it's like, hey, I
Yeah.
haven't seen you or spoken to you in I don't know how long.
Yeah,
Um,
it's been too long.
yeah, it's been quite some time. So I guess we're gonna start out with I just have like a base question. You sort of stumbled into the world of I'm using the word, I have the Hebrew word in my head and I don't have the American
Real
English
estate.
word. Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah.
Real estate. What does that mean? What do you mean you stumbled into it?
So my father works in property management in the States, a very
Okay.
different way that it exists here, because the way that property ownership works there is very different, and the type of buildings is very different. But nonetheless, it was a lot of the same kind of ideas. And during the summers, I used to work, one month a year, 1 month per summer, I would work for the company he was working for, doing maintenance, everything from washing floors to cleaning air conditioning filters, gardening, whatever needed to be done that summer. They sort of a plug and play.
Uh,
And then the summer that right after yeshiva, literally while my dad's driving me back from the airport, he was telling me how one of they had an issue with a property manager. They had to fire her. Who'd been causing a lot of issues, and the person who they hired was just so overwhelmed by all the issues that were left behind that after a week or two they quit, and that was as of that day. And so,
whoa.
and they didn't have anyone to replace another replacement. And
Whoa.
so, he goes, I got good news and bad news for you. Good news is this summer, instead of doing maintenance, you're going to be a property manager for a couple of weeks for a 190 unit apartment building. The bad
Oh
news is you
wow.
start tomorrow. So, the day
Oh
after,
wow.
yeah, so the day after getting back from yeshiva, I was, I guess, under his guidance, running, I think it was maybe a 190 unit apartment building. So I was in charge of the maintenance and, new leases showing the apartment. And I actually rented out a couple apartments that way. I sort of just winged it and kind
Mm.
of found a knack for it until they found a replacement. And then I actually, as a 19-year-old, helped train the actual adult, property manager.
Uh-huh.
And then I wasn't, didn't continue with that afterwards. I went and was a counselor at camp and did all kinds of other things.
Mm.
And then in my first year, and then when I was that summer, I was looking for a place to live in Givat Shmuel,
Mm.
next to Bar Ilan, and I really had a lot of trouble finding a place to live. I pretty much had given up, and I was going to just live in the dorm. And then, totally out of nowhere, someone approached me and said, it was actually while I was at camp and didn't even have cell reception. So once a week, I maybe saw my Facebook, and someone told me that there's a room opening up with these nice guys, someone they knew, someone I didn't even tell them I was going to Givash. They heard through the grapevines that I was moving, and they wanted to help a friend out. And they set me up, and it was the perfect setup, great apartment, great roommates, everything about it was just absolutely perfect.
Mm.
And so the following year, when I saw there was a big wave of people moving to Givat Shmuel, and everyone's posts were sort of all over the place because there were so many different people trying to do different things. You'd see
Mm.
looking for a roommate, looking to for someone to replace me in my apartment, looking for this and that, and they were all a lot of people were saying overlapping things. They could have been helping each other out because there was the sheer quantity of it. No one was able to see what the other people were posting. It was
Mm.
sort of just a balagan, as they say. And
Mm.
so I try to, I wanted to, give back, and people help me out. I help other people out. So I try to think sort of a little systematically, and I made a Google form for people to fill out, and I posted it in Camp Bar Ilan. I thought, a couple people would fill it out to help people find roommates. And then within a couple of weeks, I had a list of 70 people who were looking for us to do all kinds of different things.
Mm.
It's funny, I actually was recalling this story recently, and I just looked back at the list, and it's funny to see where these people are now.
Mm.
Some of them are people who are oh, I'm friends with now in my neighborhood, and they never ended up actually living in Givat Shmuel. But yeah,
Huh.
so I had this long list of people, and said, okay, I'll see what I can do. So literally, actually, your class, I'll give you credit. Your class was very discussion based, so I couldn't just sit on my laptop and doing apartment shidduchim. But there's certain other classes that were less engaging, I'll say. Um, and there was some downtime either during class or between classes or
Mm.
in the evening times. I was literally just trying to help set people up, but there were a lot of people who were looking for empty apartments. Like 40 people, sorry, 33 people told me they were leaving their apartments, and like 40 people said they were looking for apartments. So like,
Mm.
I guess I got to find apartments. So let's do it. So I made a flyer. One of my friends was studying graphic design. He made me like a logo. I printed out like 2 or 3 thousand copies,
Mm.
and I literally hired 2 people to just like stuff mailboxes, saying probably terrible Hebrew, saying my name's like Hillel. I'm an Oleh Chadash, Olim Chadashim looking, students looking for apartments. Can you have anything? I think I rented out like 7 apartments that way, like
Wow.
totally unofficially. Like I didn't have a real estate license. I didn't claim to be a realtor. I didn't charge a full realtor's fee. Like whatever
Mm.
people were willing to pay me. Like one person paid me 1,000 shekels. One person paid, some people paid me half a month's rent.
Mm.
But at some point along the line, I realized I should do things a little bit more officially. If this is, a business venture, even though
Mm.
it didn't initially set out to be that. I was literally just wanted to help people find roommates.
Mm.
So I probably one of the most chutzpahdik things I've ever done was there was a real estate office that was across the street from my bus stop that I just happened to know where it was. I walk in one day, and again, in probably my very broken Hebrew, I said, "Who's the manager here?" And someone's like, "I am, little Fisher. What do you want?" And I'm like, "I have a list of 50 people looking for apartments to rent. What can you do to help me?" And they're in the middle of like a team meeting. He's like, "You know what? You guys continue on without me. I'm gonna sit with this kid." And
Uh-huh.
we sat down, we talked it out, and he explained to me, I explained to him who I was. He explained to me how the process works,
Mm.
and we clicked. And within a couple of weeks, I signed up to take the real estate test. And I think like a month and a half later, most people do like courses and things like that.
Mm.
I guess I got very lucky that like a month and a half later, I took the test and passed. And until then, I was sort of like shadowing people within the agency. It was like I
Mm.
was 19, maybe, yeah, I was 19 going on 20, and everyone else there were like at least my parents' age, if not older.
Okay.
Um, and so I was doing like sort of some, helping them hang signs because they couldn't reach over the mirpeset, and taking, uploading pictures to Facebook because they don't have Facebook.
Right.
And so I just sort of learned that end of the business from them, and then I sort of just ran with it. They put me in charge of all rentals that went through the office. I won some
Mm.
awards, whatever. And worked for that. Did that. Sort of had that arrangement for a couple throughout my undergraduate, and
Mm.
then my boss at the time, his I needed to go to the army at some point, right? Because I made
Mm.
Aliyah,
Right.
and I whatever. I won't go through my whole army story unless you want to hear about it.
Maybe we'll
But
get to it. We'll talk
maybe
about
we'll
it.
get to it. But long story
Okay.
short was that he wanted me to keep on working for him when I'm in the army because I'm doing a great. I'm bringing him a lot of business.
Uh-huh.
So he had a daughter who was in a unit that was in Tel Shomer, which is 15 minutes from Givat Shmuel.
Mm-hmm.
Even by bike, it's 15 minutes.
Mm.
And I managed to get into Atuda, which is essentially where you push off your service while you do your degree, and then you in theory use your degree in the army. So
Mm.
even though it wasn't like one to one what I was studying to what they do in that unit, he was able to get me pulled into the unit, and
Mm.
that way I was able to keep on working for him. I got a work permit to continue going because I was a lone soldier, so I was able to keep on working for him while I was in the army.
Mm.
Um, Eventually, unfortunately, got sick and had to sell the franchise, and the guy who bought it was not as good of a fit. Everyone pretty much left within a couple of months.
Wow.
And I decided, you know what, time to do my own thing, and start while I was in the army. And at the time, part of the track that I was in the army was that I was sort of professional units. They want people who have degrees, and then while you're in the unit, you're supposed to get your master's degree and go to officer training. And then when you finish your obligatory service, your sadir, then you continue on as an officer in the unit. I mean, technically we were already officers, but like a real officer, not
Yeah,
like
like
an
a full
academic.
officer. Not
Yeah,
gonna.
like a
Yeah.
seren as opposed to
Right.
an academic officer.
Right.
And so I was doing my MBA while I was at Bar Ilan while I was in the army,
Mm.
and then also starting a business. Then I also got married that year, so it was like a lot of things balanced
Whoa.
on the plate. But it all I survived. So and yeah, I ran my own business for a while, a year, 2 years, something like that.
While you were in the
So
army.
while I was in the army, yeah.
Okay. And that business was continuing the same thing you were doing before, which was sort of just the real estate stuff, but specifically in Givat Shmuel.
So when I first started, I was very narrowly doing rentals in Givat Shmuel. The majority of my clients were Olim Hadashim, mostly specifically students and lone soldiers, because
Mm-hmm.
that's who I knew. I started my business just to help my friends out. I wasn't starting it to build an empire or anything.
Mm.
I was mostly helping that. Eventually, I started helping some young couples as people graduated from being students to being starting their own lives and families. That eventually helped had Israelis. Then I expanded a little bit outside of the specific borders of Givat Shmuel, because when you're working for a franchise of an agency, there's very specific rules about territorial rules about where you can work.
Mm.
But once I was on my own, those all bets were off.
Right.
And I also started helping people with sale process as well. Um, and then it was while I was still in the army that I met a guy who now is my partner, who had also been working in real. Oh, and also I was doing a little bit of property management, sort of on the
Mm.
side, on a very very basic level at the time. It was making sure that the apartment was rented out, and I was their point of contact
Mm.
for when things went wrong, bring plumber, electrician, whatever.
Right.
Um, I saw that that I was doing just managing just a couple of apartments that way, and then eventually I sort of again I'll keep it relatively brief. That I met this guy who had also recently started a different concept of a real estate agency, and we started our conversations talking about properties. Like I was looking for something that he was representing the owner, I was representing the renter, and our
Mm.
conversations turned from talking about deals and talking more about ideas and talking more
Mm.
about values.
Mm.
And I realized that this was not a regular realtor. He was really looking to change the way that the industry worked and change the relationships between people in the industry. And I was fascinated by it.
Well, okay. So, what do you mean by
Yeah.
that? I'm curious. I'm curious what you mean. Because now you're talking politics. Like
Yeah.
when you talk about like core ideas and changing core ideas, and like
Yeah.
that's like politics writ large. So what was the difference? What was going on there?
Essentially what it came down to is we were talking a lot about what there's clearly a lot of anyone who's ever lived in Israel knows there's a lot of issues in the real estate industry here, right? It's hard to put your finger on it. There's a lot of good jokes out there and memes and videos, whatever, but like what does it really come down to? And his idea was that it comes down to lack of trust. That renters don't trust their landlords. Landlords certainly don't trust their renters to take care of their property.
Mm.
Sellers don't trust the buyers, and that's why you have negotiations in bad faith and vice
Mm.
versa. Nobody trusts the realtors. Nobody trusts contractors. And so you have this whole value chain of all kinds of different people, but no one trusts each other. And so as a
Mm.
result, you have these constant tensions, and you have people getting messed over, and you have all kinds of horror stories that essentially all stem from a lack of trust. And we don't trust each other, then it's very hard to work together, whether
Mm.
it's on an ongoing basis, in terms of a relationship between a renter and an owner, or in terms of a deal. You have negotiations that happen in bad faith. You have contractors who are messing over the people buying there because it's just the way that partially it's the way that the system's designed, and partially it's just the culture in housing here that's become very cutthroat. And so
Mm.
his goal was to do what he can to bring trust back to the real estate industry. And so eventually started this company called Trusted House, with the focus being on how to bring real value to people, towards that end of trust and building a company that focuses on the people and the relationships with them and the
Mm.
processes and their what we call their housing journey, as opposed to focusing on how to sell them something and how to push something at them. Because if someone's marketing you something and trying to really sell you really hard, you probably shouldn't trust them because there's probably some reason why they're trying so desperately to sell it, right? What's wrong
Right.
with it? Whereas
Right.
if you sit down with someone and listen to what it is that they need and how you can help them, then and you're not you don't have any kind of agenda. You genuinely trying to help them fulfill their needs and with their experience, then you're able to have trust.
First of all, I think that it's amazing that you're engaging trust as a fundamental, foundational aspect of your business value, your business, what you bring to the table, because that's, as you said, not a given anywhere.
Yeah.
It would be nice if it was.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I've been talking. I found myself recently talking a lot about something called Lencioni's pyramid. It's a trust pyramid where trust is a foundation, and then you can have like effective conflict or conflict of ideas, effective conflict of ideas, which allows for commitment and it allows to hold people accountable, and then you can get real results. And it sounds like almost what you did was sort of found someone who was looking to create that foundation so that all these other steps could effectively work together. I'm curious how you guys sort of make that happen.
Yeah. I think that it's very rare to find someone like my partner Oded who genuinely like he doesn't just like talk the talk, but he actually walks the walk.
Mm,
Um, and I think a lot of it stems from actually caring, as opposed to pretending to be caring so that you can close a deal.
mm,
Like we've literally convinced people not to pay us money to do something because it's not in their best interest.
mm,
And sometimes it'll come back, towards, in the end of the day, because we built the trust that way, and they'll come back because they believe us. And other times it's just makes us feel good. To be able to feel good about what you do, I think, is also really special. And I think in many cases we really do genuinely help people who need it, and not just about who's the highest bidder. Then you can feel good about what you do. And I think that Oded is a unique person in that he's both a visionary and he's also really good at what he does in terms of practicality. So the way that we do it is by breaking things down into processes, right? So if
mm,
someone wants to buy, majority of my time these days are helping people buy a property as opposed to selling them places. We're trying to understand their needs and then help them buy it. So by breaking down the purchasing process into 7 steps, as we have in our website. Now it's probably broken it down a little bit further from the time we put it up there, but broken it down into a number of steps, and then understanding in each one of those steps, how can we make sure that you're going to be set up for success by either asking a lot of questions, by integrating people who are the experts in that field, right? I'm not, while we do everything under one roof, it doesn't mean one person needs to do every single aspect of that step, right? Bringing in
mm,
a mortgage consultant, one of the examples I gave when I mentioned before about convincing someone not to do something. So we had a client who wanted to sell an apartment and buy another apartment. There's
mm,
a lot of complicated details involved, and we're like, I can't claim to be an expert in all the different here are the processes that you're going to go through to do the selling and the buying, but I can't claim to be an expert on what are the implications of each one of those steps. So let me bring in a tax consultant and a mortgage consultant and a lawyer and an appraiser to each do the analysis on the step that they'd be responsible for and be involved in, and let's see how it all comes together. And the conclusion from the tax consultant was she's going to pay 1 million shekel in taxes because of the situation that she's in, and it's just
mm,
probably not worth it for her. I mean, it's up to her if it's worth it for her, and we spoke extensively with her. And in the end, we didn't make any money off of her, and that's fine, because if we had made money off her and she had lost money on her deals, I wouldn't have felt good about it, and that's not a story that I'd be able to tell to any of the dozens of people that I've told that story to as part
right,
as part of making them new clients. So
right.
being able to really have people's best interests and need. Actually, I'll say before that, being able to have a long-term view is based on the fact that we care about people, and therefore allows us to actually follow through on those values. If you're having, you're if there's a disconnect between the product and the client, you're just selling a thing to someone anonymously overseas, you don't maybe it'll damage your company's reputation if they're not satisfied with it, whatever. But buying a home or renting a home is a very personal experience. It's where you live. It's where you spend every day. Even if it's an
Mm,
investment property, it's probably one of your biggest investments. If you're putting 1 million, 2 million, 3 million shekels, it's a very personal, emotional connection. And
mm,
so if I'm going to give you a bad taste every time you're in that home, it's more than just, I was dissatisfied with the product that I bought. It's I'm pissed off because I'm suffering. So
mm.
by having a long-term view of the relationship with the client, we're able to really, it forces us to really be true to ourselves.
So it sounds like the value you want to bring and the way you are thinking strategically when you're talking about vision, it's not about, I mean, yes, you have your own vision as a company, but when you deal with your clients, your vision statement for them is one that says, we want them to be comfortable and happy with the outcome no matter which way it goes, whether it's they choose not to work through us, or if they buy something that at the end of the day, they are going to walk away feeling like they got real value and their experience of that value after the fact, not even during process, but after the
Yeah.
fact, will continue on for, into the future. And that future thinking is sort of what's driving your processes through. Is that a good way to explain it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in marketing classes that you take in the MBA, the first thing they tell you is the most important thing of marketing is word of mouth, and that comes down. That's why there's a connection between marketing and product, because if the product isn't good, then you can do as much advertising as you want, but if people don't like your product, then they're not going to tell other people to buy it, and they're not going to give you good reviews. I think that's all the
Right.
more so when you're having when you have a small business where every single client counts. Most of our clients, honestly, are repeat clients. We don't spend any money on advertising, other than if
Mm-hmm.
there are cases where we're trying to sell properties or trying to rent out properties. That's just part of the nature of how the business works. And so for those, we're going to pay for the specific listing sites. But we're not
Mm-hmm.
paying to advertise our services, because all of our clients are either clients who we helped previously with something else, and now they want us to help something, with the next part of their housing experience, or they want to help their children buy a place, or the place that we help them buy, they now want to help rent us. They want us to help them renovate it, or we help them buy an investment in property, and now we're managing it for them, or now they
Mm-hmm.
want to flip it and do something else. They want us to sell it for them, or they were just so happy with it that they brought us another client.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like a kitschy thing that they say in marketing classes, but it's really, I mean, again, our industry, our line of work is very different than a lot of other industries.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, it's like couldn't be more true that giving real value comes back to help you.
Okay. I think that that's a super important lesson. I mean, I think that's a true lesson like in life as well. When you give value to people, when you help people out, when you don't come with the what do I get out of this, but what am I giving
Yeah,
out of this perspective, when you have that perspective on the relationship, it often comes back and there's that pay it forward aspect, but also the pay it back aspect.
yeah. And it's a
I'm
mental
wondering.
shift. You have to. It's sometimes it is counterintuitive. Sometimes I'll have a client who I've just done something that I really didn't want to do and had to work really hard on something. I wanted to send them a bill for it right away, but I know, like, no. What would Oded do? What would my partner do? I know, because I learned a lot from we could talk later about leadership and fellowship. From a fellowship perspective, I tried to like think of like what would he be, what would he say in this instance, because a lot of those
Mm,
ideals I think trickle down from him.
okay,
Yeah,
so you know what? Let's get into that. You met Oded,
yeah,
and and it sounds like has acted as a mentor for you in addition to being your partner.
yeah.
He's sort of been your mentor on what it means to think in terms of bringing value to the customer. What have you learned from him? Can you give some lessons that you feel like you learned?
Sure, I'm gonna embarrass him. We'll see if I don't know if he's gonna watch this or not.
Ah,
But
embarrass him. It's okay.
yeah.
He doesn't know me for
I think that like I said before, that it's very unique. It's very rare to find someone who can like walk the walk and talk the talk, and he has the ability to think creatively and sort of think outside. Think that keeping in mind the bigger picture, but also being able to dial down to the details. I think that's a very unique skill that is important for entrepreneurship, being able to do both, because it's not like you have a whole staff of people who are, you've got the CEO up in his corner office doing the brainstorming and then giving tasks to the people, to the lower people. Like, he's also doing those tasks. He's doing like a lot of really menial work on a day-to-day basis. So first of all,
Mm,
being able to see how to balance that, and there's a lot of room for anyone to improve, and being able to balance different task management, things like that. But I've certainly learned from him in that respect. But just the way that he talks to people and listening. I think listening is definitely one of his strongest skills. He can sit with a client for 3 hours if he had the time to do it, and he has done it. Sometimes the amount of information and being able to genuinely listen, right? Not just look like
mm,
sitting and looking like he's listening so that they feel happy. He'll come away with a meeting and have a million different ideas of how to help that client, because he's listened to
right.
how they personally need help right now, where each of their children are at in their life, and how they're going to need help even 5 years down the line. Let's write that down so we can follow up with their children, and all kind and things that aren't related to real estate. they mentioned some kind of medical need. Oh, I know a doctor who's in the hospital who can help them out. And really genuinely listening to a person's needs, because that's also value to give someone if you can help. We had a client who, I don't know. I could give so many examples. Like who had tons of art sitting around in their apartment, and he sent them to his whatever, someone who he knew who can help them with it, can help them with an art collection, whatever. All kinds of when people see that you listen to them, it helps build that trust. I think that's definitely something I've learned from him.
Hmm.
And there's also just general nuances of how to approach certain situations and deals that I like to consult with him on, because he's, I don't know, 10, 15 years older than me.
Hmm.
But every year someone has experience in different things. He also grew up in Israel, so having more connections to the Israeli things and Israeli mentality, I've also learned from, because most of our clients are Anglos, but a lot of them aren't. And seeing how he talks to other Israelis is also helpful for me when I speak to those Israelis, because it's not the same not necessarily the same conversation that I'd have with an Oleh Hadash is the conversation that we had, yesterday with someone who's lived most of their life in Tel Aviv area.
Mm. Okay, so as as partners, how are you guys sort of dividing up the responsibilities that you have together?
So there's how we divide it up in theory. What happens in practicality? In theory, he's the CEO,
Hmm.
and he does a lot of the sort of bigger picture thinking. And he's really not into titles. He really would be happy to just be called Oded and not be called the CEO. I think his
Hmm.
humility is also something that I've definitely learned from. He's very humble, but and he'd also be happy to share in brainstorming on greater strategic things. But because I trust him like 100% on a lot of things, I'm like happy for him to do a lot of that, as well as the sort of the business side of things, the business, the financial, the legal, whatever. But then on a day-to-day basis, I'm sort of more responsible for the clients. Hence my title is also relatively arbitrary. I'm the chief customer officer, I think is what I have written down.
Yeah.
That I'm primarily, that's primarily with the customers who are looking to buy and rent, whereas he's more
Hmm.
responsible for the operations. Right now we're managing a few dozen apartments across Israel. We're managing
Hmm.
several buildings as like the Bad Bite company. We're involved in a number of
Hmm.
projects in terms of renovations or different things like that. So he's a lot of the more technical things. We also do sort of a financial management for a number of properties. We help people with paying their bills, especially foreigners or in Olim Chadashim.
Hmm.
It's not easy to get everything in your name and get the payment set up. Even if you are Israeli, it takes some. I personally have. It took me I think 2 years to get my name on my gas bill, and I've sent them all the
No, it
things
took us
the first time
it
and
took
the
us
second
eight
time. Yeah,
years. It took us 8 years to get our name on the gas bill. It was
yeah.
crazy.
So we do that for a number of our clients, where we have all the bills come to us, we pay them, and then send them one organized, simplified bill plus a small service fee. So he takes care of all those. So he's responsible for all those operations things, and I'm
Mm.
responsible for more of the broker side of things. We also have someone else who's working for us, and we're in the process of hiring others. But practically, when you have a small business, everyone does a little bit of everything. I'm also doing plenty of operation stuff and plenty of
Right.
today. Just right before we got on this call, I went down to get a receipt from a painter and making sure he got painted and sending pictures to the owner and whatever. Like, practically you do things as they sort of you go with the flow. But in theory, that's sort of the breakdown between us.
Okay, that's very cool. I mean, and it's also important to recognize that when people have a small business, as much as you might want to be in that place of, oh, I'm thinking, strategically, and I can have my head in the clouds, sort of, and thinking about vision and what are the major steps and all this stuff. In reality, everyone needs to get their hands dirty a little bit. You need to get down into the trenches and sort of see what's going on. Even if you're the CEO of a big company, it's important to get down in the trenches. Even more so when it's a small company, two, three people working together trying to figure that out.
You'd be surprised with
So I think
how
that's
dirty we've gotten our hands with a lot of our work. Very,
oh
very
I
literally. Yeah.
that actually makes a lot of sense considering the nature of what you want to do and how you want to come across in terms of being trusted and being able to provide value for your
Yeah.
customers. Um, so from that first meeting with Oded and things sort of started moving, what was like the process of you guys going from, hey, this is a concept, this is sort of an idea we have, which is like the first inklings of a strategy. Like that's like when inspiration hits. We're talking like that's grand strategy barely, right? When you started doing it, when did you like? How what was the process you went through to really make it start working together?
Yeah, so before I was on board, he had a previous partner who he initially was starting it with. Well, yeah, before that he had a partner who he had started an agency with, and we had sort of been doing Shituf Pula, like working together. And then when he decided to start Trusted House, he had a partner who was coming more from the building side of things, and he was coming more from the real estate side of things.
Mm,
And they were, I was, I guess, would have been like the first employee as opposed to the initial founder. And that sort of, and I remember very distinctly Oded saying, "I'm taking you out for pizza, and we're gonna chat." I had no idea what we were gonna talk about, and that was when he like sort of presented the vision for me, and I was blown away. And a lot of it was technological focus as well, people focus, and plans change when you're a small business. We've been Trust House officially was established 5 years ago, and a lot of things have changed, since then in terms of the
mm,
strategy as well as the different approaches and business models.
mm,
But essentially, there was we knew what in general what the grand vision was, but it was a big question of how that translated into real life. And so we toyed with a lot of different business models, or I guess value propositions is more correct, of
mm,
understanding. Okay, here's the value that we want to bring to people. Who are the people?
mm,
So I was still working, had my own business, and I was still in the army. So we decided that I was only going to officially join Trusted House once I finished the army. So there was sort of a couple months where I
mm,
was between the two of doing my own thing, but also helping them build up what they were creating. But so even before I was officially on board, but definitely more so once I officially started. Before we were trying to do any transactions, it was really trying to nail down how we could provide value to people. So we tested out. We thought about we dove very deeply into each model that we looked at. People with
mm,
disabilities, elderly, Olim Khadashim. We really looked at a lot of we met with experts in each of the different fields. We had sort of test clients, I guess you could say, from someone who with disabilities, someone who had sick children, people who are elderly, to really see, okay, if we apply this here, we apply that there, who's how is it going to work? Where is it the biggest need? And in the end, we decided that Olim Khadashim, the new immigrants and English speakers or foreigners, I guess, was the place where we could provide the most amount of value. And that worked out well for me because it meant that a lot of what we were doing was going to be in English, but that wasn't necessarily always
mm.
going to be the case. Um,
Right.
and so the first, I don't know, it was the first year, definitely first number of months, we didn't close a single deal. It was like startup mode. We were just losing money. Really,
So you were in strategy. Like, you were in strategy
yeah,
mode.
one hundred
Like I
percent.
mean, well, you were totally focused on strategy, right? I don't know if you remember, but when we spoke about strategy, it's like a 5 stage process, right? Where you got that first inspirational moment where like you're interacting with someone else, and all of a sudden you go, oh my god, that's great. And then strategy is about deep diving. It's about seeking knowledge, seeking information, really understanding it, analyzing it until you come away with some kind of real knowledge tree, some sense of like, okay, this is what we know, and this is what we can provide as a result of that knowledge. Here's what we can put forth. Then you've got like the operative stage where like it's like, okay, so what resources do we need, and what's our values and our doctrine and our culture, and how do we want to run it? And then it's all the tactics and like actually the running and the whatever and moving
Yeah.
around within interactions and things like that. So you sound like you were really doing strategy for those first few months. When did you find yourself sort of transitioning into, okay, well, what are we going to need to be able to do this? Like, what resources are we going to look at? And, like, what is our doctrine? What is our value system? How do we want to really present ourselves to the world? When did that sort of, like, become the core focus? And what objectives did you sort of set then?
Yeah, so we definitely didn't just decide on these things alone. We consulted with a lot of people. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time consulting with different people who are experts in each of those different aspects that you were talking about. So we knew that the
Mm,
customer experience was going to be something very important. So we had someone who was a expert in customer experiences. They help people. Let's say one of the previous projects they should have been working on was for one of the big supermarket chains. What is the experience that someone goes through getting membership, and like really
mm,
going through the whole thing? So that's what we wanted her to be doing, her and her team to be doing with us. We had team workshops that we had other people working for us sort of in and out over the course of that first year. So we had different workshops we did, different consultations, and then we also had someone. I was less involved in this. This was more before I was officially on board. Was from
Mm,
a building, I guess you could say building the brand, and like what is our
mm,
messaging? Like exactly what you said. You know, how do we present ourselves? And we spent a lot of time, and they really spent a lot of time before I was on board of trying to really nail down of like how do we say the things that we believe in a way that clearly expresses it. How do we back it up with data, and how do we back it up with, and that was part of how we came. I think that was part of how we came to the split that ended up happening with the original other co-founder, is realizing that at some point realizing that like wait a second, not all the things that we're talking about are exactly aligned with each other. Like there were sort of two different visions that were converging, um,
mm-hmm.
which is fine. That it's not easy, but that's part of the growing pains of a small company is realizing is making sure that everyone has the same. The core values were all the same, but I guess it really came down to strategy and tactics,
Mm-hmm.
and business focus. But yeah, bringing in, being humble. I think going back to things I've learned from Odette is being humble and realizing that you don't know everything, and don't think that you're gonna know everything from like looking up on YouTube, or you learn a lot from school. That's definitely, we implemented things that I was learning from my various professors. It was helpful, the fact that I was doing my MBA also at this time, or I just finished doing my MBA by the time I joined Trusted House, because I was able to at least talk the talk, of the from a management perspective, and the finance perspective and marketing perspective. There's a lot of nuances that are involved. So at least that was helpful in that respect. But there's still sometimes you just need someone to sit down with you and say, okay, let's break down this process, because you don't know how to do this. It's not something you've ever done. So how do you
Mm-hmm.
break down something into processes and connect that to the technological side and connect that to the marketing side? So it was a long, exhausting process, and it's a process that you're going to always be in, because um, you know, in order to survive, you have to be dynamic as a company. You can't just like, this is what we do, this is what we're always going to do, and that's forever.
Mm-hmm.
You have to adapt to the needs of the clients and the technological realities around you and the economic realities around you, for sure. So, but yeah, but that initial couple of months, we weren't involved in any actual deals. At some point, we did start doing sort of, we kept on expanding the number. We said, okay, I'm going to be in charge of these 4 clients, and each of them were from a different one of those sort of type of clients. Then it sort of expanded from 4 to 5 to 6, which was a little bit overwhelming, and that was part of the problem. That's
Okay.
part of the problem. But I don't think we profited at all off any of those clients. But they allowed us to really test out what we were trying to do, and try to give value and learn from our mistakes. And there were plenty of
So
mistakes.
that was your first. So that was like your first jump into real operations, right? It was your first jump into like, hey, let's set a some kind of objective where the objective was let's learn, right? It was a learning objective. We want to figure out what's our best one. So you're going through different iterations of, well, there's this kind of client and that kind of client. Oh, well, this is the ideal client for us because it checks a whole bunch of boxes. Would that be a way to describe what you're talking about?
I think that was part of it. Um, Again, some of it was just sort of through the conversations that came up, and based on sort of trying to look retrospectively, but also it was a very difficult balance, I should say, of trying to strategize, but also be in the field, simultaneously trying to sell an apartment, help someone do manage their renovations, helping someone else convince their neighbors to do an urban renovation, helping someone else to buy an apartment. So it's
Mm,
very hard to simultaneously be trying to do that, but also trying to build things on the back end. But I
mm,
think what emerged from that was realizing that some of the paths that we wanted to go down, were just going to either be too difficult, or we weren't going to be able to maximize our potential.
okay. Um, so what how have you used some of the lessons you've learned from that process of building the company? How have they sort of come about now in how you relate to your clients? Like, what are some of the major lessons you learned there, and do you see them still being part of what you're doing now?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the fact that like I still frequently quote one or two of those experiences when I'm talking to other, talking to prospective clients, or when we're talking amongst ourselves. Every once in a while, it doesn't happen so often
Mm,
anymore because now we've, thank God, had a lot more clients we've been through, and so we have more examples of things that we can reference. But when I'm like
mm,
training someone, either an intern or a realtor, um, those are the kinds of things that I would reference. That example of the client who we convinced not to sell and buy was an example of trying to display that the fact that we really genuinely do care about you. We're not just trying to take your money. Look what we did with this other client. I think that's
mm.
helpful for ourselves to be able um, to help ourselves see, help myself see the bigger picture, but also show like we really do follow our own value set. Um, and some of the other experiences just help me like just be familiar with the actual processes involved. Right. Again, I was 23 or so, 24. I don't know, 25 at most when this was happening. So I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
so much experience in that many different kinds of things. Most of the first couple of years, I was mostly just doing rentals. I didn't have any experience with managing a renovation project, or with selling a property, or with understanding Tama 38 or Pinui Binui. So through those initial client, customer experiences, I was forced into the deep end and had to really learn. Okay, what are the different bureaucratic steps involved in a Tama 38, and how we're going to help them get through it. I wasn't, set up to do
Mm-hmm.
it on my own. I obviously had the team I was working with to share their, knowledge and experience with me. Um, but it really forced, if you're going to talk to someone who's going to come buy an apartment, and you need to explain to them what the potentials of the apartment, because of because it's going to go through Tama, well, you have to know what Tama is to be able to do that. So it sort of just forced me to learn a lot more about the nuances in the various aspects of the real estate experience, real estate
It
industry.
sounds like learn. Yeah, it sounds like learning's been a very big part of this process for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think you constantly have to be learning. I think yeah, it was in my BA. I had a professor. I'm blanking on his name now. Maybe it'll come back to me. It was organizational behavior.
Okay,
Uh,
I don't remember.
a Belgian guy, really nice guy. He was also from
Okay.
Yivashmal. And I remember him saying, he's like, because he himself had also transitioned from being an engineer to being a organizational to a psychologist, then being an organizational consultant, and he was constantly like learning new things and learning how to do different things. And he says, the day you stop learning, you die. No, I think that was his quote. It is English. That if you're not moving forward, if you're not progressing and constantly learning new things, then you're just stuck and you're not really moving. You're not going to be able to keep up. I think was the message from there. And so I'm constantly listening to, there's 3 or 4 different podcasts I listen to that are related to real estate, or economics in Israel, and also economics in the U.S., because there's definitely connections between them, especially since many of my clients are from the U.S. Being able to understand where they're coming from and their economic situation,
Mm,
and how the housing crisis in the U.S. relates to here, I think is also important for me personally. So listening
mm.
to a lot of podcasts, reading the news, trying to find who are the other experts in the field to be learning from, I think is very important. And it's I think a regular, I hope I'm not generalizing too much, but I think just a regular realtor whose job it is to market an apartment and sell it to someone, that's the thing. Like, they don't need to know most of those different things because they're not involved in all the various nuances of the industry. But because we do a lot of different things, or I should say this, because we want to help our clients with anything that they need, we need to be able to do a lot of different things. If a client tells me
Mm.
tomorrow they want to do, I don't know, some crazy kind of project, or they want to sell this and buy this and do that, I want to be able to help them with anything they need. So that means I need to know as much as possible. And it's a lot of different things. And I
Mm.
can't claim to be an expert on every different aspect in every different city, because I've done deals just in the past 2 years. I've done deals from Beersheba up to Afula, Haifa to Yerushalayim, literally all over the country. And I can't claim to be an
Mm.
expert in everything. But the more that I do and the more that I listen, the better the more value I can provide for each of those different kinds of requests.
Cool. Um, so you've obviously learned a lot on the professional side. I'm curious how you're seeing some of that in your daily life. How are you seeing, like, you talk about listening, like active listening, right? Which is what you said Oded taught you. Active listening is something which was super duper important. How are you seeing that come across like with your wife and kids?
You have to ask her. She thinks that I think it's important. Part of active listening is caring about what the person has to say, um,
Mm.
and I think that when you're in a relationship where you actually care about the other person, you should care what they have to say, and sometimes I'll be genuinely honest and say, like, I'll have a conversation while I'm like responding to WhatsApps, and I'll be like, Shoshi, I'm not listening to you right now. I'm not going to pretend like I listened to anything you said. But, like, let me finish this. Because if you're like pretending to be listening while you're multitasking, then you're not really having a conversation. You're just being a
Mm.
sound wall, or really just a
Mm.
wall. um, so I think being honest when you're having when you are communicating, of when you're available to listen, and being mindful of where your concentration at, I think is an important aspect to it. Yeah.
Any other lessons you've learned that you see yourself applying in your life, family, kids, whatever?
I think that when I started off this story with the making the Google form and trying to connect people, I think that I have, to a certain degree, it's intuitive for me to try to think of things in an organized way. But by
Mm.
doing it for my work and applying, seeing the technological tools and how to, whether it's a Google Sheet or Monday.com, shout out to Monday.com, where Shoshi works, that we use for ourselves, or any of the other programs that we use, seeing the capabilities of how to manage tasks. I certainly do in my own life. Like when we planned a vacation to Morocco last year. I made a Monday.com board for all the different things that I need to do, and the different things, and assigning tasks to Shoshi and assigning tasks to myself and uploading files. Like, I don't think that necessarily everyone works that way. Um,
Okay.
but I try to be consistent if I'm going to manage. And one I guess important source of learning, I think, was getting things done by, was his name David Allen. Um,
Mm.
I've started it several times. To be honest, I've never finished it. But I know, which is ironic, right? Because it's all about getting things done, and I haven't gotten it done. But the thing is that the first time I listened to it, I'm like, wow, this is like amazing, learning so much. Second time, I'm like, no, I need to start over again and take notes. So as a result, I was doing it very, very slowly, and I couldn't just like passively listen
Mm.
to it while I'm driving because I want to take notes.
Mm.
Um,
Right.
so as a result, it was just became an inconvenient way of reading, so I never ended up finishing it. But there's still a lot of lessons that I learned from there in terms of how to manage your time and how to be an organized person, and
Mm.
managing both your business life and your personal life with the same approach. I think is definitely something that I learned a lot from from him.
Okay. Cool. Um, so from your schooling until now, was it worthwhile for you? Like, was the school worthwhile for you?
Yeah, yeah. I think that I was at Bar-Ilan at a very good time. Like, obviously, I learned a lot of
Mm.
things, but
Mm.
I think that also just having the framework of being in university was helpful, specifically in Bar-Ilan at the time that I was there. Being the second year in the international program, or I think it was a bit of a sandbox for the administration in terms of like playing around with how to create this program, and seeing that they
Mm.
genuinely were relying on students for helping build the program, and it was just grassroots people doing things. And because the community was small
Mm-hmm.
enough that anybody could make anything happen, the potential was there. And so
It was the
the
environment. The
environment,
environment was
yeah.
like I was
You
part of
were
this.
you were the
I
previous
mean, I was part of the
generation
people.
of making those things happen.
Right. Right. And I mean, yes, I was very much like I was part of developing the Barilan Acting Society, and like I was very much into like all the things about that grassroots
Yeah.
concept. But I was also part of the administration at that point. Like I was the academic director of the
Yeah.
programs, and it was like I agree with you. We were very much sandboxing it. We were trying to figure out what's the best way, who's our best clients, who are the people we want to draw on, exactly. And I think that something you're saying here is really important. An environment that's open to new ideas and open to, hey, it doesn't have to come from the top down. It doesn't have to be me as the academic director saying, hey, this is how we're going to do things, but rather, hey guys, how do you want us to do this? What's the best way to do this? You're our clients, or you're our students, or you're our, how do you want to see this happening? And I think that goes back to what you were saying before, which is you want to see things through the client's
Yeah.
eyes, right? You want to be looking through their eyes and say, okay, what's the best way you want to see this happen? What would be ideal outcomes, but also ideal
Yeah.
process for
Yeah,
you, right?
exactly. And that's I think why that environment allowed me to create the business that I created, because there was a need for it. I didn't need to go through any kind. I mean, I went through certain formal processes of getting a license and whatever. But for the initial starting point was
Mm-hmm.
just people want help. I'll see how I can help them. There's a need. I'll fill them in. I think that's sort of a microcosm of Israel in general, as the sort of Israel, not of today, but a couple of years ago, when it was a startup nation and most opposed to a unicorn nation or whatever people are calling it these days, where
Mm-hmm.
people, there was this sort of this exactly the same kind of environment of there's a lot of smart people and there's a lot of things that need to happen, and we're growing, let's grow fast and make stuff happen and take risks. And that's, I think, how we got to a certain extent. Again, it's a larger conversation, but I think that to a large extent that's how Israel became the startup nation that it did.
Right. It's the see a need, fill a need attitude is what you're
Yeah,
talking about, right? It's we see something needs to get done, and I don't need to go and ask, someone else to do
yeah,
it. If I can do it, and I can think critically about it, and I can go, hey, this is what's gonna happen. Do it.
yeah,
Let's. What am I
yeah,
waiting for? I don't need to get permission. Let's
yeah,
just let's just start it and
yeah.
see what
You fudge the
happens.
rules a little bit, and
Um,
you.
fudge the rules a little bit along the way and see what
Yeah,
happens.
exactly.
You've told me about some of your successes, even though they were financial failures, your value successes. I'm wondering if you can tell me a story about a failure where it was a proper failure and the lessons you learned from it.
Yeah. I could tell you something from, well, it hasn't been a failure yet, but
Hmm.
um, I guess it's more just indicative of similar kind of things that happened. Is that, we had a client that we had great conversation. I've been in contact with them for, I was looking back at our WhatsApps for a year of trying to like nail down what we're going to provide for them, what they need. Their needs have changed a little bit. We finally got to the point where I said, okay, we're gonna sign a service agreement, and like, great, here's how we're gonna like edit the service agreement a little bit so it'll work for your needs. And then we just got busy with other things, and then we're like, okay, it's been in my to-do list for a while. Okay, finally get around to starting to do things, and we found potentially something that they were looking for, and they'd already found it a week before. But our service agreement says that they're committing to us searching for them, and there's certain penalties if they cancel the agreement if we're providing what we need. And so I started talking to him about it, whatever. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I go back and I never sent him a service agreement. Our last conversation was, great, I'll send that to you later today, and then we'll follow up. And then I literally just like got busy with other things, never sent him the service agreement, started the search a couple weeks later than I planned on doing it. As a result, hopefully we're going to help him with other aspects of what he's trying to do, and that'll still be great. But like, we did the work that would have gotten us, the big commission, as opposed to some smaller things, which are great and will provide him value for other things. But the biggest value is finding him the home. That was the biggest challenge. And it's happened,
Mm.
a couple of times that we had clients who wanted us to find them a place. We just literally just didn't have time to get to it, and as a result, they ended up finding a place that we would have found them if we had had the time to search for it. That's definitely,
Mm.
that it hurts when it's like, as much as the values matters more than money. When it's like 100,000 shekel commission that you miss out on, it hurts. Um,
Right.
and the lesson from that is being able to is a prioritizing, right? The things that have
Mm.
taken up our time, that the reason I didn't get to it are things that were, or sorry, we have to question ourselves, were the things that took up our time so I didn't get to, were those things that were actually more important, or they just felt more urgent
Mm.
because there was more pressure from the client. He was, I suppose, another client who was laid back about it, and he ended up finding, on his own, as opposed to the other, like, I need this thing done, it's an emergency, whatever. But also being able to delegate better, right? Did we all use the best? Everyone who's on the staff, and now we have someone else working for us, and we have an intern. Were we all maximizing everyone's time so that the people who are best fitted to do the more important tasks were actually doing the tasks at hand? And I don't necessarily know the answer to that question because we haven't had the time to sit down and
Mm.
properly think about it. But from the conversations we had, it's certainly something that we're trying to address, is why we're trying to expand our team so that we can provide the level of service that we promise to everyone.
I'm curious because there's okay, so there are structures and systems that exist to like the Eisenhower matrix, right? You've got urgency and
Okay.
importance, right? So how urgent is the thing? Very urgent,
Hmm.
not urgent, important, not so
Yeah.
important, right? And each of those quadrants sort of gives you a sense of, well, what am I supposed to do with this now? So I'm curious. I brought up one. Do you have you guys started engaging any thoughts on a system that you would use, and if so, which and
We
why?
definitely don't have a formal system for evaluating things like that. We sort of have like unofficial. All right, and we have like, rules of like, okay, at this point, there's certain types of clients that we've stopped taking on at all, things that were part of our bread and butter at some
Mm,
point, but it's just not worth our time as much, and either because of the money in the short term or because in the long term. Certain types of clients, there's no long-term outlook. We're not going to be taking them down their housing journey. It's just a certain specific type of scenario that's just is just not going to be worth our while to help them for a 6 month whatever it is.
mm,
So that's definitely that's I think a big part of it is looking at the bigger picture and what is we were having this conversation the other day, 2 days ago I think it was, when we were looking at our financials, and certain things were bringing in a very small amount of money on a regular basis, and we were being questioned, like, why are you doing this if they're not? And so we say, okay, well, this deal, because this 700 shekel a month client led us to this other building, which within that building will help do this and that led us to the other thing. And you can look at each client, and if you can look at a client and say, here is the chain of deals or chain of the values we've been able to give them along the way because we
mm,
wasted our time for that 700 shekels, then you can justify it. And so
mm,
being able to look at any potential thing that comes our way and say, okay, is there that potential for it to be something like that, or is it just going to be a one and done thing that may or may not, that probably isn't going to yield anything in the long term? Then it may
mm,
be lower on the totem pole, and I think that's part of why I missed out on that deal, is because the things that I was engaged in were ongoing management things for clients who I'm building up a relationship with, because I want to manage their place for 10 years, for 20 years. I want to be there when they want to do a full renovation, or when they decide that it's too small for them and they want to sell it. So I want to show them at every stage that I'm there
mm.
for them. But as a result, I wasn't there for this other client who asked me to find him a place to buy.
Right. So that's very interesting. It sounds sort of like the nature of your decision making is the difference between strategic thinking and tactical thinking. Right? Strategic thinking, you're saying strategic and operative thinking, you're saying, well, look, I'm if I look long term and I look at the vision and I go, okay, I'm building up a process here where I know that if I create this relationship over time and I maintain this relationship over time, there's going to be added value to me as a company, and I'm going to provide added value to my customers throughout that process. And it will probably come back and pay us dividends over that time. That the if I just look at it as a snapshot, 700 shekels, it's 700 shekels versus 100,000
Yeah.
shekels. But if I look at it as a long-term process with added dividends over time, that payoff is much greater, and it also matches our value system more than this
Right.
one-time
And it's
payoff. Is
Yeah,
that
and
sort of
it's
what?
and part of what's hard, it's hard to know is like, well, let's say I went with the other scenario. Let's say I went with 100,000, looked at the big money now. Well, maybe by taking that now, I'll have money to hire someone else who can help us provide value to other people. And so while I may push
Mm,
off those other people for a minute, I know I'll be able to give them better service in the long run because I have someone else on, specialty on staff. So it's very hard. It's very hard to know. Some of it is
right. It's a
instinctive. Yeah,
balancing
some
act.
of it is instinctive. Some of it is what's more convenient at the time, and some of it is sometimes just make mistakes.
Yeah, because making mistakes is how we learn.
Yeah.
Okay. So so I understand the failure, and I understand that you're saying it's about prioritizing and things like that. Um, have you had any major success that you learned from?
I think
Like a major
major
success?
success that I've learned from. Yeah, I think that any of those cases where we've just put our head down and put in a lot of work into making a client happy, that's brought us. And thank God there are a good number of examples of this, where one client we thought was like, oh, this was like exhausting. We finally got through this deal. I'm like so glad this is over. And then you have no idea, have no idea how the other client feels about it or thought about it, because they may have been tough, or they may have been hard to reach, or whatever it was over the course of the deal. And you're like, okay, I'm glad it's finally over. And then a week later, you get an email from someone saying, hey, I shared amazing things about you from X client. I'm interested in doing X, Y, and Z. They said you're the best person to help. And you're like, okay, great. And that's thank God happened several times.
Cool. Um, You spoke briefly about leadership and followership, and you said, "Hey, let's jump into this a little bit later." I'm curious, what's your experience with it? And you just mentioned leadership again. How have you sort of experienced followership? How do you see yourself in the followership roles, and what has it meant for
Yeah,
you?
so I first heard the term followership from you, and that's something I necessarily thought about or
Mm-hmm.
necessarily something I think about on a regular basis, but
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's something that I've come to appreciate as um, working with Odette and being able to, and I think that I'm very very lucky the fact that I found someone who I can follow. It's definitely not something that's a given. Unfortunately, a lot of people, don't necessarily find that in the professions they want, or not everyone looks for that necessarily. But being able to find
Mm-hmm.
someone who you both trust as a partner and in their abilities, but also that I trust his decision making. And if I'm not available to do something, or if I don't have the headspace to think about how I should approach something, the fact that I could feel free to like ask him, I will most likely listen to his advice. I think that's part of followership and being able to be humbly aware of your position. Again, he's like, we're not, because we're a small company, like titles and things like that really don't matter. But I personally
Mm-hmm.
see myself as looking up to him in a lot of these things. So I don't necessarily remember all the concepts that we talked about in class and fellowship, but I've got to imagine that's part of it is of being able to be self-aware of the fact that you're
Mm-hmm.
choosing to listen to someone and follow their, but still challenging them. We certainly disagree on plenty of things. It's usually on a tactical
Mm-hmm.
basis as opposed to on an ideological basis. Um, but and I
Mm-hmm.
and he'll listen to me plenty of times. He'll let me. He's not, again. There's no ego battles, and I think that's also a really nice thing that egos really don't get in the way. It really comes down to what is the best thing we can be doing, and trusting each other is part of the trust us way. So I think that's what I was referring to in fellowship. An interesting thing that I was thinking about recently as the company started to grow, and it's something I thought
Mm-hmm.
about years before, and before we had the I was in your seminar when I was only been in your initial class. I think we talk a lot. Not I mean in general, I think the world people love talking about leadership, and that's often I've been to dozens of leadership seminars and this and that, and it's always about leadership and the difference between leader and not every manager is a leader and vice versa. But I think that because there's been such an
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on leadership, that there isn't so much emphasis on management. And so when I've stepped into
Mm-hmm.
management roles, I found that I actually don't know how to do this. Like the first time that I had that experience was when I mentioned before, I was a Roche bus on Machach Baretz, and as a counselor, I think I was,
Mm-hmm.
if I may say so myself, I think I was a really good counselor. I'm really good at connecting with the kids, and I could do the leadership, inspirational kind of stuff. Whether it's telling stories or having deep conversations with kids on a one-on-one basis or in small groups or addressing the whole group. I think that was something that I was really good at from the
Mm-hmm.
leadership, whatever the qualities that I observed from other people or that I was taught. But then when I was not thrown into, but when I was given a management position where I was in charge of the other staff that was doing those things, I realized it's very different, and I didn't feel like I was necessarily prepared
Mm-hmm.
for that. I'm sure if you ask the counselors who worked under me, they would agree with me on that. And I think those
Mm-hmm.
sometimes were points of contention that I was approaching it as a leader as opposed to as a manager. That I didn't know how to properly understand each person's abilities and make sure that they were delegated tasks or understanding what they wanted to do, but rather sort of my grand vision. I think that was definitely something that I could have been better at. And now that I'm in a position where I have people working under me, it's definitely something that I want to get better at. Management, yeah,
Management.
management.
Okay, so it's interesting because when we talk about leadership and management, it really is like two
Yeah,
sides of a coin. Where like leadership is about vision and the relationship and all that stuff like you're saying, and then management is about knowing who to delegate to, how to delegate to them. Resource management, time management, setting up very clear key results that you expect and being able to express those like that's what you're
yeah,
talking about. So it's very interesting that um, I find it interesting that even in an MBA, you're still saying, I still need to learn it.
yeah,
I think we've
yeah.
covered quite a bit.
Sure.
I'm gonna close out with is there anything you kind of wish that I had asked and I didn't, or that you wanted to talk about that we didn't, and if so, what? And then you can answer your own question.
I think you asked a lot of great questions. I think it was very interesting conversation,
Okay.
sort of opening up the greater story to different parts. I think was very cool.
Thank you so much. This has been phenomenal. It's always good to catch up and to see how you're implementing some of the stuff that I taught and that you learned. And I really, really think that you have you've expressed some very important concepts, and that you are driving an idea which is not, it's not something that the you find in your field very often, which is you want to be trusted and you want people to feel good about this process. It's not just about closing the deal, and I think that that's really, really amazing. So Hillel, thank you very, very much for
It's been an
joining me
honor.
here and for teaching me. I feel like I learned a lot. I really do. I feel like I learned a ton. And
Appreciate
yeah,
it.
let's
Yeah,
keep
it's
in
been an honor
touch.
being here, and absolutely, definitely be in touch.
Thank you for joining us in the Doctor's Den. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hope to see you next time.